when this initially came up, it was supposed to be just me talking for an hour, and I don't think that's fun, right? I think that's not for the consumer or for me. And I think the idea is three panelists, three great people. I'm thrilled to share the stage here with Bryan and Bryan. Great friends of mine, and I've learned so much from them over the years. So again, guys, thank you for being here. I think this is going to be a good time, and it's a great topic. So as Jeff said, Senior Vice President here at Compass. I've been at Compass for about 6 years. I retired from the United States Coast Guard after 21 years, where 18 years of that was doing cybersecurity. The first year, 3 years was search and rescue. So when we talk about proactive versus reactive, you might probably guess that I'm coming at it from the proactive standpoint. I think prepare, prepare, prepare. If you prepare, the reaction is that much easier. Whether it was search and rescue, where we train for something you hope never happens, but inevitably does, right? And when it does, are you ready, right? The Coast Guard's mantra is semper paratus, right? Always ready. And part of that is going to be the preparation that comes into it. When it's time to react, right, you're either prepared or you're not, right? I always say, when X happens, right, did you do all the steps before that to be ready for it? Right. And our goal here is yes. And talk about things from a proactive standpoint that helps you to be reactive, when the time comes. We're all living in a world that is changing every single day. And I think the preparation and proactiveness is key. So I don't want to kind of go too long here because we got a ton of questions to get to. We do love, I will say, that do not hesitate to ask questions during this. More feedback from you, the better. Make sure we're answering your questions and keeping in line with what you want to talk about. So again, do not hesitate to ask questions as we go, and we'll certainly get to them. So again, appreciate it.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Bryan Chnowski, Deputy CISO at Nuvance Health. For those not familiar with Nuvance Health, it's a 7-hospital system in Connecticut and New York, a couple hundred offsites, 13,500 employees, 2.6 billion in revenue. A little background on me. I actually started off as a programmer. Quickly pivoted because I didn't like being in a padded room programming all day. So went to IT and kind of worked my way up from information security analyst to network architect, I think is where I topped out at. And then pivoted again to the security side from, security engineer all the way up to CISO. I've been in healthcare for the past 14 years. Prior to that, insurance, financial, even higher ed. My responsibility. So I'm responsible for the cybersecurity strategy of the organization, budgeting, metrics, project alignment, incident response, and staffing. With regards to the staffing, we have, the way our organization is built, we have a security operations team, security architecture and engineering, identity and access management, and IT governance, risk and compliance, and 25 employees really kind of spread across, all those disciplines there. With regards to hobbies and interests, I firmly believe in work-life balance, and I instill that within all my employees. So I enjoy my family time. I have two, one in college, one going to college. So we like traveling, music, new country, food, Italian, golf, atrocious, and I do volunteer a lot within my community. I sit on the Brookfield Security Task Force, which is really its mission is to ensure that there are sufficient security controls in place within our school system. And I also sit on our Parks and Rec Commission. So that's me. Right.
I'm Brian Kelly. And Brian, if you apply CJ's approach of practice to your golf game, that'll be proactive and maybe it'll improve.
There we go.
So glad to be here. So I've been here at Compass for almost 2 years now in the role of the CISO within that practice. But I've known Compass for as long as Compass has existed. I was a customer in my previous life. Once upon a time, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at Quinnipiac University. And that's how I met Compass, did all of our audit work way back when they first got started. So I decided that I'd rather be an employee versus a customer. Came here after a 4-year stint with Educause. So prior to coming in, I had about 16, 17 years in higher ed. The last 2 years, I've had a number of different clients in the vCISO role, so it's been really exciting. And we've got a couple of military guys on the call today. So CJ mentioned his background in the Coast Guard. I did 20 years with the Air Force. I retired from an Air National Guard role back in 2013, and still have many friends and colleagues that are veterans. And one of the things that I thought was something I want to talk about today was I recently had a friend give me this book by Patrick Van Horn and Jason Riley about Marine combat hunters. And I'm thinking, I'm an Air Force guy. We like the Marines. They protected us while we were golfing on an Air Force base. But what is this book called, Left of Bang? Why would I be interested? He said, hey, it's a great book. It's about cybersecurity. And I was like, okay. So, what is this left of bang, right? And this the story that I've been telling, right? And I read the book and I'm like, okay, so the left of bang is there's a military history associated with it back to 2006 and the Iraqi war. It was a way to protect Marines in those convoys from improvised explosive devices, IEDs. And sort of the military, right? We talk in terms of incidents. They called the incident the bang, right? That was when the IED detonated. That was the bang. That was the event sort of in the center of that timeline, right? And right of the bang is sort of that reactive approach, right? It referred to all the events and everything that happened after the explosion. And left of bang, right? The title of the book is everything prior to the incident, right? So a really good example of proactive versus reactive. So I'll drop some links in the chat. I'm a sort of a book nerd. Bryan talks about his background, his hobbies. My wife says cyber can't be a hobby. So if I can read other things that aren't necessarily cyber, it's not a hobby. So I'll drop some books in there. But really what the value of left of bang for cybersecurity, right, is what you're trying to do is what we're going to talk about today is be proactive, right? The approach is to help us identify changes in our environment, right? Help our teams address threats before they wreak havoc in our environments, right? We hear so much about ransomware these days, right? Ransomware, as most of you already know, is that's the bang, right? That's when the bad thing happens. But there's a whole bunch of things that have happened in that timeline before that ransomware detonates, and all of those things that we can do ahead of time to recognize, right? That's proactive. So we'll talk more a little bit about it, but I wanted to use that opportunity to talk a little bit about the book and just to give you guys some homework for the weekend. Go out and get the book and take a look at it. But with that, I'll throw it back to you, Jeff. I think we have questions coming up next.
Yeah, we do. And thanks, Bryan and Bryan and CJ. That's great stuff. So we're going to go into some questions that we've kind of talked about and really questions that we've gotten. And I've been with Compass for 11 years. And in that time, I've talked to probably thousands of different clients, right? And helping them kind of understand, where in the information security journey they are and kind of what are the best steps for them. And probably one of the biggest questions that we get, or I get, and my team gets all the time is, what is your most proactive and most important step to be proactive? Is it training? Is it assessments? What is it, right? So I'll turn this one over to Bryan Chnowski to start, and I'll let you guys kind of fill in. But so what's that most important proactive step, Bryan?
I think all proactive steps are important. I do. But when I look at it from a perspective of 85% of security incidents involve a human element, my focus shifts to training. So at Nuvance Health, we have, a rather, comprehensive security program. We require all workforce members to go through mandatory annual training. It's a requirement for new hire orientation. We do have a robust phishing simulation program, really focused on rewards. There are activities associated with Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We publish articles to our security intranet site in general communications, and lunch and learns. It runs the gambit. The security team understands that the training program needs to be significant, needs to be at the forefront. So that's why they, kind of built this approach that, addresses it from all these different means.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think, I read a stat recently that was 95% of all incidents are because of employee negligence, right? And generally that's clicking on a link, right? Forwarding something they shouldn't be forwarding, accessing something they shouldn't be accessing, downloading, sharing, sending to personal. That's an insane number to me. And again, I've always tried to say, or debunk that we as humans are the weakest link. And around every corner, I have to eat my words, and I can't. And I think so. I think training is definitely number one. And the way you go about it, right? We've seen, whether it's the security awareness training, right at offboarding, right at onboarding of an employee, and you have the phishing testing as well, and not just to do a phishing test. Hey, we sent a phishing test. Here's our score, right? What's the follow up? Right? Are we educating the users on, hey, here's the test. Yes, you failed it. Here are the cues that you could have looked at for it. And another one that I'm going to add that is maybe not as tangible as an assessment or even doing training. And Jeff, you probably heard me say this before when they ask about, hey, what do we need to do going forward? Right? What's the first thing? I said, we did the first thing, right? You called us, right? You called asking for help. You have the mindset that says we need to do this. Now, sometimes that's reactionary, right? So a lot of times it's, hey, what happened that now you're looking for cybersecurity help, right? And again, I'm putting it into the, how we're reacting generally to that. But working for an organization, when you start looking towards security, right, and you have that mindset that we need to start doing this. Hey, here's what we're not doing, right? I think that mindset becomes very, very, very important. And then that next piece that, Jeff mentioned the word assessments, right? Doing those risk assessments, not being afraid to call out what we're not doing, right? There's companies that we go through, and I've seen risk assessments where they want it to be perfect, right? And I see a perfect risk assessment and I say, they didn't dig hard enough, right? We should have findings, and we should want to have findings. And I always say there's no wrong answers, right? Tell us the findings, let us identify the risk so that we can go fix it and protect ourselves and make sure that bang that Bryan talks about doesn't happen, right? Or the likelihood of it is much less, right? So I think, between the training, I really think the mindset of having a proactive mindset to look to what we have to do, maybe what we're not doing well, and then using that risk assessment to actually call it out, and not be afraid to turn over those rocks.
I would just add, and CJ, if you're counting how long it takes me in a webinar before I use my favorite statement of like sort of moving from NO to KNOW, every conversation we have is that raising awareness of not only the what, but the why, right? So when you do, the assessments, right, what those findings mean, the knowing and the educating on the risks, the gaps, right, being proactive about the findings, even the phishing assessments, right? We want the end users maybe that fell for that to know what the risks are along. So I think a lot of that being proactive is certainly awareness, right? And the training. And, you and I disagree on the weakest link or the first line of defense when we talk about the humans, right? And I see both sides of it, right? But I think there's an opportunity to raise awareness, get those folks that are probably going to be the ones that put you in jeopardy, to understand the sort of the knowing what that risk is, what the right thing to do is, and sort of being proactive, right? That's part of that, is letting you know that they might have, what's that? See something, say something.
Right.
Do we still say that anymore? I don't know. But anyways, that's just that perspective.
Yeah. And one more piece of that too, that I wanted to add, is when we think about those risks and that risk management side of things, right? There's the enterprise side to it. So are you reporting your risks up, right? If we're keeping it at this level, right, then we're kind of burying it. And I don't consider that to be proactive, right? Engaging executive leadership, letting them know what the risk is, right? Making those recommendations. Is it our decision to decide whether to spend the money and do that? We have some input, but ultimately it's going to be management's decision. And that's that part of no to know. I come from a world where for 18 years as a security officer, 7 different states and regions, that it was, nope, can't do that. Nope, classified system, can't do that. Nope, nope, nope. Now it's, how do we say yes, right? How do we limit the risk with allowing the business to keep going forward, right? Being proactive in that sense, I think is very important.
Yeah, it's a great point, CJ, and great points by everybody, right? And we always say it's better to be proactive than reactive, right? For a variety of different reasons, obviously, right? And staying left of the bang, but also from a cost perspective too, right? It's typically more costly to be reactive than it is to be proactive, although it probably doesn't feel that way at that point in time, but it's a critical step. So since we have a lot of auditors that are attending the ISACA webinars, when conducting an audit or assessment, what proactive steps should you be looking for throughout the process? And I'll open that up to whoever wants to take it.
I'll start. I look for a tried and true risk assessment process for identifying and assessing critical assets, threats, vulnerabilities. I look at security policies and procedures. Are they comprehensive? Are they up to date? Are they aligned with industry standards and best practices? I look at access control. Is there role-based access? What does the MFA coverage look like? Is there, timely termination of access when an employee workforce member leaves the organization? But then I look at regulatory compliance. Whether it's HIPAA or PCI DSS or some of the state regulations. And really the last piece I look at is framework alignment. Are they aligned with NIST? Are they aligned with High Trust COSO or any of the other frameworks out there? So those are kind of the 5 I look for.
Yeah. I would add one word that I look for is planning, right? So in our response planning, our business continuity planning, our incident response planning, our disaster recovery planning, right? Planning, we kind of can have the not just the planning, but the testing, which I think goes hand in hand with that planning, right? When we test, when we have lessons learned, when we continue to enhance, this is going to be the word of the day, I guess, Brian, but when the bang happens, right? Everyone's running off with their the heads are cut off. It's what do we do? It's kind of panic, right? It's the fight or flight. And when you get that way, you forget things, right? So having something you can go back to that says, hey, here are our steps. Here's what we should be looking for. Here's our escalation points. So when I go through and look at the risk assessment, I think any one of us can do things and prioritize and put maybe weighted questions on different frameworks, whether you're talking about the NIST or, again, I love CIS because I think that's has a ton of benchmarks and really sets a proactive stance as we look at these things. But for me, it's the planning. And again, probably my short introduction just, kind of laid that out, but I'm looking for the planning. I'm looking to know that we're doing these things because the reaction, and again, I really know we're focusing on proactive here because, maybe that's a 90% rule. But we can't properly react in a timely manner unless we're doing the proper planning and continuously. So again, I think in that, as much as all those controls are important, I put a heightened emphasis on the planning part of it, for me personally.
Bryan, did you want to add anything? Or are you good on this one?
I think I'm good in this one. I had a thought and I didn't write it down and it escaped me. It was early in CJ's statement. So anyways, yeah, I'll pass. Thank you. Sorry. For now.
No worries, and no need to
Doesn't
apologize.
Write this down. It doesn't happen often.
Well, I think you're listening. I think that's when you're on a panel, whether it's in person or live, you're always sort of riffing off who you're with and you're thinking, you have what you want to talk about. And then you're like, oh, that's great. Or I want to move. And then I was reading the chat too. So my brain just overloaded and blanked for a second there.
No worries. We'll allow it to happen from time to time. So obviously we're talking a lot about proactive, security and cybersecurity, right? And it's obviously touted as the ideal approach to protecting against different threats, whether that's ransomware or whatever the case might be. What are the key advantages of a proactive cybersecurity strategy over a reactive one?
And I mean, I was going to say my prepared stuff in this was really around, I think, CJ, part of what you had talked about was, right, reactive in my notes, really, it requires the incident to happen, right? You're responding to what has happened, right? And those reactive measures are necessary, right? And to some degree to mitigate immediate threats and sort of limit what's happening. But there's things that are dependent there, right? You have to dependency on the occurrence, dependency on your ability to detect that thing happening, right? So back to that left of bang, right? We're gonna work this book to death today. Being able to detect that incident, and to be able to react to it, you have to detect it first, right? So if you can't do that, Reactive is resource intensive. I know we talk in the industry a lot about sort of having a volunteer fire department. Most of our organizations are not large enough and staffed well enough to have a dedicated incident response team. So you're bringing together people from different areas of the organization to be that reactive force, and that's resource intensive, right? It's limited, and you can't react in scalability, right? How many simultaneous incidents can you react to? So, when we're thinking about those things, and oftentimes at the end of sort of that reactionary path, right? CJ's talked a lot about planning and exercising. Sometimes we fail in our reactive mode to address sort of the root causes. We don't always go back and do what sort of, if we're staying in that military lane, sort of a lessons learned or a hot wash, we used to call them, and sort of understand, are we going to change whatever might have led to that? So I think that's a good segue into sort of, where does proactive come in, right? And sort of raising awareness, those regular security assessments that CJ and Bryan have talked about, right? You'll hear in the profession, people talk about continuous monitoring and threat intelligence as, a proactive measure. For me, that's, again, awareness raising, awareness of what's going on in our industry, across industries. Bryan Chnowski and I, both in Connecticut, very active in ISSA and ISACA, and part of why we're here. So, even though coming to these webinars, the intent isn't necessarily threat intelligence sharing, that's what we get by coming together in these events. And then my last bullet was around awareness. We've talked about that already, but really sort of being able to do that proactively, rather, and building those things into your posture, right? And I think, CJ, you've talked a lot about sort of building those into our plans, right? And words like resilience and being able, right? Those are things that being proactive about that helps you be better, right? So I think we position it proactive versus reactive, but they sort of go together, right? It's not Red Sox versus Yankees. It's, a little bit of, right, that planning will help you be reactive, right? It's the practicing. So I don't know. I think I answered your question, Jeff.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give a couple more to add on to it, because I think when you think about what's the key to being with the reactive side, right? It's timeliness, right? How quickly can we react? So when I go in and I start asking questions and say, we're looking from a planning standpoint, right? And in every training presentation I've ever done, I have a duplicate slide. It is when things go wrong, right? Which is, who do you contact, right? What's the number? What's the email address? What's the Slack channel? Whatever the case may be. And I put it up and I say, please put in the chat anybody who knows who to contact. And 99% of the time, it's less than 10% that know the answer, right? So when we're detecting, how are we finding out? If something's going wrong, what tools are going to tell us it's going wrong? If the employee sees it first, how are they going to notify IT or anyone else that, hey, I just saw something a little bit out of whack, can you take a look, right? How are they going to do that? That's all part of the timeliness, right? One of we hear the ransomware, right? We're not detecting ransomware. We're in the system for 3 to 6 months before they actually do something, right? So if we can identify things quickly and we're alerted to it quickly, I go back to the days when we didn't have a SIM and we're parsing through logs on a daily basis, looking for something that might be unauthorized access, and we're looking through a government system and there's hundreds of thousands of logs. Are you going to go? No, you're going to start searching for maybe keywords or certain numbers, alert IDs. Now we've got this we've got a lot of tools in place. Let's make sure that we're getting the alerting set up so we can respond quickly and mitigate that problem as quickly as possible. So again, for me, that is that real key when you're being proactive to set these things up, is making sure that you're prepared for the reactive side.
CJ, you saying that, it brought a thought to my head. I have hanging in my office here. It's a picture of, believe it or not, Mike Tyson, and it has everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think about that all the time. I thought about this question in kind of a different light. The key advantages of the proactive measures, proactive security. First one being prevention. If you're able to stop a security breach before it happens, you save time, you save money, you save, reputational damage, and you reduce cybersecurity risk. The other piece is the compliance piece of it. Regulatory frameworks are now requiring organizations to implement proactive security measures to protect that sensitive data. So kind of thought of it in a different light.
Which is the best part of doing a panel like this is the contrasting thoughts. You don't just get to hear my thoughts and my opinions for an hour, right? You get three of us that really have contrasting, different experiences and different approaches to that. And I think that's, what really for me makes this a lot of fun.
And I'm just going to chime in, Nick. I don't know. I was in chat. Carolyn was asking a question if it was appropriate for her to chime in at this point, but I don't know if only I'm seeing that chat, Nick, or if you're seeing it. And she was asking whether she could unmute. And I don't think, Jeff, we were set up for unmuting. We just wanted participants to drop the questions in chat, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we don't have it set up so people can unmute.
But Carolyn, I would love to hear what you're doing.
So she just wrote, it was a reply to how we handle employees reporting possible incidents and how we communicate with call tree and then mini tabletops and tops, so everyone knows their role, was what she just wrote.
Yeah, no, I think you're
I think I'm in a separate thread. Yeah. So
no, I see it.
Okay.
We're gonna have to add Carolyn to the next panel.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah, she had some good stuff in there too, and she was recommending a couple different solutions that she's used throughout the course. So definitely take a peek at the chat because there's some good information going on in there as well. So obviously we spent a ton of time talking about proactive cybersecurity measures, right? But let's talk a little bit about reactive cybersecurity measures, right? So obviously we put a ton of emphasis on the proactive side of things. That's kind of why we're all here, right? To kind of talk about the proactive stuff. But why is reactive cybersecurity still essential in today's threat landscape? And can you guys provide any examples of scenarios where reactive measures are necessary?
I could start with this one.
Yeah.
It's impossible to predict and prevent every type of attack. Okay, that's why you need those reactive measures in place to reduce the impact. So that's why whether it's incident response, whether it's forensic analysis, data recovery efforts, or even ransomware negotiation strategies, that's why they're all so important.
Absolutely. CJ, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so we're all kind of here to be when something happens, right? And again, as much as we focus on the proactive side, right, it's that importance on the reaction side. Every single one of us on this call has unexpectedly had to work through a weekend. Everyone has had to work through a night. Everybody has been there when that reaction is necessary. And the answer is, in your organization, do you have the right people? Do you have the right tools? Right? Do people that are willing to, hey, I'm Mike. I'm missing government work, right? No, I'm done at 4 o'clock, right? I'm out. I don't do anymore, right? That's horrible, right? And when something happens, when it happens, right? Are you prepared to go resolve it, mitigate it? And again, I go to the private sector, which I love the private sector compared to what the government is we're trying to keep a business operating. Right? We talk about BCP, we talk about IRP. Those aren't just IT drills anymore, right? It's the entire organization. It's how do we keep the business running and operating? So when it happens, right? It's identifying right now. You can probably all sit there and say, hey, what gaps do I have to be able to react and get us, back up and running quickly, right? I'm sure we all have gaps, right? And so there's things that are on a risk assessment that we're not doing. Is that a gap when it comes to being able to react in a timely manner, right? I think it's key. I think it's a question that you have to ask, right? What are we not seeing? What are we not looking at? What systems are in your BIAs of your critical systems? If something happens to one of those systems, what happens to the rest of the business, right? Are you prepared to be able to react to that and equipped? And how much is it going to cost? And who are we contacting? Right. One of the things I go back to from a reactive standpoint is insurance carriers, right? Do we know what our insurance policy is, right? Do we have an incident response retainer, right? If we're not capable of doing it, do we have an incident response retainer? And one thing that I've run into in the past is we had an incident response retainer, and when we contacted insurance, turned out that incident response company was not approved by the insurance company, so we couldn't even use them, So we paid for a retainer, didn't check with insurance to make sure it was good. You had to use somebody in their approved network, right? So now we go to React, and we've got this big gaping hole that we can't fix because we can't move forward with the incident response retainer. We got to go set something up somebody else, which now we don't have. So now we've got a prolonged outage, right? So that, all the preparation we did, we still had gaps. And when it came time to react, we had an even bigger gap, and we were down for a lot longer than we expected.
And I would just add too, I think, we talk, we're talking, CJ, you and I always talk like people, process, and technology, right? So talking about those right, technologies, the vendors, the processes, your practices, right? The teams are using, right? It's sort of working through, those scenarios, right? So that's why I think the chat's talked about tabletop exercises quite a bit, and the value of those exercises, and talking about threat hunting. But it's really, when we talk about recognizing and boosting the recognition of threats in your environment, it doesn't necessarily need to be an adversarial threat, right? It could be the threat of using a non-approved vendor, right? But you have to sort of walk through. So that's why some of that, proactive going through those scenarios, whether sort of real or imagined, right, helps maybe reduce the intensity of the reaction, or, so just sort of thinking through that. And I apologize, Bryan, for jumping in on you. I'm watching the chat, I'm listening, and I'm thinking, man, there's so much to cover, right, on this. So go ahead, Bryan. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I'm actually just responding to one of the messages here. All good.
So there are a couple of questions that have come through in the chat, and Tim asked, what are your guys' thoughts on passkeys?
So we talking like a YubiKey type passkey?
Sure.
This is hard when you can't unmute, right? So password managers, passkeys,
right.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you this. So password managers, again, I love, but I also find a little bit of a risk with them. Again, we have all seen the LastPass breach. I know when you have to go change your password change computers, right? If you don't have a proper recovery, you may lose all that information. But I am a huge fan of password managers. It's much better than using your browser for sure. The YubiKey, which again, if passkey is something that you're kind of relating to, that hard token key, I think much more secure than I think it's going to be attached to your computer, right? So something that you hold on to, you physically have control over. Anything that has those different layers, I'm a huge fan of, and would always have my security hat and say absolutely. So I would say I'm a fan of passkeys. Just hoping I get that context right with your question.
I think you did, because the follow-up was passkey MFA versus password plus app. So I think you got it. Another question that came in. Am I shutting you off there? What am I doing? Any other innovative features, tools, or strategies that are disrupting the tried and true controls?
So let me give you one that I'm using with the company I work with now, and to their credit, they found it, and it's something that's called, again, same thing. I'll get this context right. Bullwall. Bullwall is a tool that if it detects any encryption, that it completely segments every single folder and file, so that the encryption completely stops with where it's at. And I was a little bit skeptical when we first looked at it, but we've tested it numerous times, and it works great. It's not something that's super expensive, but it was just something. And I don't have any stock in it, but it's something that I've used and think it's, when you think about ransomware, that being that biggest fear. In the test that we did, of the millions of files that they had, 13 got encrypted. And the rest were complete, and they were segmented, and the rest were completely fine. So it was really a cool tool that we had to test out, and I really liked it.
Bryan, anything that you guys have come across or anything that you've seen?
No, and go ahead. No, so go ahead, Bryan.
Now it's sorry for not jumping in earlier on the YubiKey piece. That is something that we are implementing for all of our privileged access at Nuvance Health. And from a passkey perspective, passwords only take you so far. We're actually increasing the length and permutations allowed, but it's going to get to a point that we're going to switch over to passkeys. It's just inevitable.
And I was just going to add that we've gone, 30 some odd minutes without talking about AI, right? So we think about, I know there was in the chat about maybe using Copilot and security. So everything is better. AI is like allspice. If you sprinkle it anywhere, it makes everything better. But, we are seeing a lot of clients piloting AI, trying to build guardrails, sort of looking for help in building policies, practices, what technology, looking at where the regulatory and audit environment is going to be around AI and that. So, maybe that's not necessarily innovative or new, but the strategies for trying to both enable, right? So CJ talks about getting the yes, right? We want to see security enable the business without just back to no versus, no, you can't use AI. How can we use it for the business to move forward, but also how can we use it as security and audit practitioners, right, to make us better as professionals. So that's probably a topic for a whole other webinar on AI, but we're talking about new and innovative. I just wanted to sort of at least respond to that in the chat.
Awesome. I'm going to read this comment that Carolyn put into the chat because I think this is super, super. And CJ, it kind of goes back to the point that you were just making a few minutes ago about having someone in an instant response retainer. Then you call the insurance company and they say, "Oh, guess what? Can't use them. Got to use somebody else," or one of the ones that we've already, vetted and partnered with. So I'm just going to read this, and I want you guys to kind of react to it and kind of give me your thoughts because this is actually a great point that I hadn't necessarily thought of before this, right? Cyber insurance carrier is one of the first points of contact after an incident has been contained or quarantined. They will tell you which firm you should be using and much more. I found it to be useful to call them during your mock scenario and ask them hypothetically how this call would go. Ask them which firm they will be assigned to and then call those folks and form a relationship so you know the drill so it's not the first time that you've talked to each other. I think that's a great idea, right? We talk about all of the planning and the, tabletop testing and all that type of stuff. And how much do you guys see this being implemented, right, in terms of taking that tabletop test to the point of reaching out to the insurance carrier and saying, hey, we're going through the testing phase of things, right? We're doing our due diligence over here. Who would we be reaching out to? Who would we be putting in contact with? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Like I think it's something that you should have into every single test that you do during the planning phase. Again, training as you go through it is, hey, part of these steps is when would we call insurance? And one of the things when I put my facilitate a instant response test or a BCP test, which again for me a lot of these with all these cloud hosted systems, BCP and instant response have kind of tied together, melded together really well. Because that system goes down, right? Our business has kind of gone down, so it ends up being a bigger relationship, which makes that relationship with the carrier and then who's going to have your instant response retainer even more important. And I love the simulating it because how long it's going to take, right? Are they going to answer? Are they going to call me back? Am I getting a live voice? Do I have to go through a link on a computer to report something? And what's the callback time? How long until I can get going? We talk about RTOs and RPOs, right? That RTO, that time that the insurance carrier is going to get back to us, we're kind of paralyzed, while we wait. So I think it's a great idea to tie that into your test. And see how long it takes, right? You may have to block off some more time on your tabletop, your simulation, but it's very valuable information. And again, go back to Bryan says no, no. He's got twice so far. I'm going to say there's no wrong answers again. That's twice for me, so we're tied, right? That's my line. There's no wrong answer. If the insurance company takes 2 hours to get back to us, that's the answer. We might not be happy with it, and it might lead us to changing the insurance company next year. But it's valuable information that we now put into what the expectations are. And those expectations are huge. And again, go back to enterprise risk management. We report our findings up and our lessons learned up to the executive. Is this okay? Right? Because now we just extended our recovery time or our backup and running time by another 2 hours because this is how long it took. Right? Don't shoot the messenger. Right? But that's what the point of the test is. So Carolyn, great. I double down. You can join this panel anytime. Great job.
Except for now, because we don't know how to unmute. We
can't. Today.
Anytime except.
Yeah, that's the only challenge that we have at this exact moment. So Timothy put a comment in there too, asset inventory tools, knowing your attack surface, right? And that's one of the things that we always talk about is you can't protect what you don't know that you have, right? Whether that's hardware, software, data, right? So understanding where all of that stuff resides. So I don't know if you guys had any comments that you wanted to add on to that, but I just wanted to point that out that came in through the chat as well.
Jeff, I think you're absolutely right with that one. It's one of the, what's it, number one for the CIS control, 100%. No, you got to know your environment. You can't protect what you don't know. So that's, we've really focused on asset management in our organization. We're an Avanti shop, so we have kind of everything fed into Avanti, and that acts as our service desk, so it's kind of integrated there, and our CMDB and kind of everything else. But really crucial, got to know your environment.
Yeah. Data management too, right? Same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah.
So we went through a drill recently, and again, it was a great dashboard, a great report that I got to see, and it was showed us all the data and how old it was, right? So I think we went in this drill, it was 13 terabytes of data, and we got to see how much of that data was 0 to 2 years old, 2 to 5 years old, 5 to 7, 7 to 10, and then there was 10 to 14. And how much that data was redundant, how much that data had open read write. It was really amazing to be able to see it, and right, that's part. Go back to the inventory and what your attack surface is. But now once they're in, what's the damage that's out there, right? And then the redundant data,
Yeah.
right? A third of that data was redundant. So now again, it was a great tool, a great drill to go through, and I think really advantageous from a cost savings just on storage, but then in a risk reduction, as well.
And CJ, I would add to the other part of that that was valuable was sort of the obsolete data, right? So you have to know, right? So what's the cardinal sin of a data breach is losing data that you shouldn't have kept to begin with, right? So I think there was a lot of you could mention that tool too, because you've already mentioned one already, but maybe there's an opportunity to share that. But I think those three legs of that stool are really important, right? So we think about, you got to know where that asset is to protect. We also like sort of going back to protecting the data, regardless of what asset that's on, right? So they're sort of starting to be neck and neck in that horse race of what's more important, right? Knowing the assets or making sure you know what you have as far as data, right? So that's where that exercise was fruitful for you.
Right. And I guess I got to be fair because I don't have stock in either company. So if I'm going to say Bullwall, I got to say Congruity 360 was the other one. So yeah, it was great.
I was just gonna say I don't I don't have stock in either one either, so I was gonna say it, but you beat me to it, which is awesome. But yeah, it's a
You
great.
got to be fair.
Yeah, I got to be fair, right? We're equal opportunity. We mentioned all the folks that we have great experiences with, which is awesome. So, but it's a great point, right? It's terrifying, you know, to think of how much data businesses accumulate over time, right? And it's kind of that situation where it's you feel like you need to keep it for some unknown reason. You don't want to delete it or get rid of it because you might need it in the future, but you haven't, accessed it in 10 plus years, right? But I
It's
can't delete it.
it's
But
like the
then
nuts and bolts I have in my basement, is what you're saying. Like
it's
that
exactly the same
loose
exact
screws. Okay,
bingo.
yeah.
That's exactly it, right? I might need them at some point in time in the future. I don't know when, but I might need them. And turns out you never need them, and then you end up throwing them out, right? But think of the risk that it poses to an organization to have all of that data that is obsolete, and but it's just sitting there ripe for the picking, right? And in addition to all the other things that were mentioned in terms of cost savings and things of that nature. So it's an interesting conversation for sure. So thanks for the asset inventory commentary. It's definitely very, very important stuff for sure, and foundational, as Bryan Chnowski mentioned. Um, uh, so now that we're kind of talking about a lot of different pieces here, right? Like, how can organizations strike a balance between investing in proactive cybersecurity measures and maintaining effective reactive capabilities, right? What factors should they consider when allocating resources between prevention and response? And CJ, I'll turn it over to you. I sense that you might have some strong feelings on this topic, but I don't know. Maybe I'm off.
So I think my strongest feeling is I think it's very difficult. And I think when you go ahead and you put your budget together and you go back to your risk assessment and where are we strong and where are we weak, right? And I think it goes back to, not being afraid to tell yourself, we're not doing this. We're not equipped for this. We don't do this well. And identifying the parts that we're not doing well and that we have to bring up. And sometimes that's, again, I'm a cheapskate, so I don't want to spend money on something I don't have to spend money on. How much can I do this on my own, right? How much can I fill this on my own? How much of it is elbow grease and just an effort? And it's not the easiest effort, right? Some people I can get out, swing a hammer, no problem. But to actually sit there and formulate a plan and go through how we're going to act in these situations and how dependent we can be on a tool. Like, again, I think one of the best things that you can do is invest in, you have the incident response retainer, right? A company that's on the hook, that has the experts, can do the forensics, can do all the work for you. I think it's very important, but it's not free, right? It's not cheap. So detecting, investing in those prevention tools that Bryan Chnowski. It's hard having two Bryans, because I say Bryan, they both take credit for it. But investing in the prevention, like Bryan Chnowski had mentioned, is where I go generally. But when it happens, that impact is usually much greater. Right. So there has to be some kind of balance to it. So I honestly, I have strong feelings, but the strong feeling is it's very difficult, and it's different in each organization. And no matter what you choose, you're probably wrong. Right. You put too much in reactive, you're not preventing or detecting properly. You put too much in prevention, and you're probably screwed when something happens, right? Because you can't react well. So I think it's a very, 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 very tough balance, unless you're one of these larger companies that has open-ended pockets that can just spend on everything. But if you don't, I think it's very tough. And then you become very reliant on having the right people. And that's a tough question too, right? Do you have the person that is going to run through a wall and do whatever it takes? And do they have the knowledge and the ability, right? Because I think sometimes we get very specialized, and maybe we can't do everything well. So it's a terrible answer, I think, to your question. But I think it's very tough. So with terrible answer, I usually talk longer. So I went long-winded to just say it's no great answer.
So I'll give you my perspective on this one. Those are good answers, CJ. Me loves tools, okay? Loves technology. So we've invested heavily on the proactive side, the tools, the prevention, whether next-gen firewalls, all the way down to endpoint solutions, okay? But now I look at how I spend my time, and it's dealing with third-party incident response on my side. So it's kind of flipped. I wish I'm getting at is I wish I had a better balance. It was heavy on the proactive side, and now reactive is, creeping up. I wish I kind of kept it level in the beginning, because then I wouldn't be in this bind that I'm in.
And yeah, I had scribbled the word balance, right? And you said it, right? I think there's a balance, and just sort of I don't know, there's a formula for how you get to that balance, but yeah, that's the word that came to mind.
Good word.
Yeah. CJ, I'm going to solve your problem. When we talk about Bryan, we'll say Bryan with a Y and Bryan with an I. That way we know which one we're.
Don't you call Bryan Kelly Buddy? So we can call him Buddy from now on.
Let's call him Buddy too. That's fine too. He loves that. Seems to put a smile on his face. But that's a whole other story for another webinar.
That's the way you say it.
All right, buddy. So proactive cybersecurity, right, requires continuous monitoring and risk assessments. How can organizations ensure that their proactive measures remain effective in the face of evolving threats and technologies? Kind of sounds like $1 million question. So we turn that one over to Bryan Chnowski. Bryan with a Y. How about that?
Sure. So, again, at Nuvance, we subscribe to multiple threat intelligence feeds, and we ingest automatically, which has really been, key for us. And, again, that helps with the deal with the ever-changing threat landscape. But the other piece is really on the fostering collaboration and information sharing. So, we have good relationships with whether it's government agencies, trusted partners, and, even services like HISAC. That's one that we belong to. And, we are actively involved in the Connecticut Hospital Association and, some others. So, that's kind of how, we're approaching trying to stay up with, this landscape that just seems to, continue and change on us.
Yeah. So for me, and I love that we have this. So we have an audit risk and risk management team here at Compass, and they are constantly keeping us up to date on all the changes, whether it's PCI 4.0, NIST 2.0, as CMMC has evolved, right? And I think, HECVAT, moving to a 3.05, right, catching other things. So being able to stay on top of those changes, right, it's almost a full-time job as well. right? Because we want to make sure that as they change with evolving threats, and I'll tell you that they're probably late, right? They're probably a couple of years in development each time they're doing it. But to get updated on that, to see why we're changing focus in different areas as these new assessments come out, I think is very important. Same thing with the pen testing, right? I don't think we talked about pen testing too much today, right? But I think pen testing is one of the more proactive things you can do, especially, again, hopefully doing it every year. As your environment changes, before you introduce a new application to your environment, understanding what vulnerabilities exist, but what can be exploited, right? And as they generally go off of the OWASP top 10, what is that top 10? What are they really fighting against? So I think that's another great way to stay ahead of what might be changing. And then to double down on what Bryan with the Y said, again, those feeds, right? Bryan Kelly said he has to have a hobby that's not cybersecurity, right? But what makes him incredible and knowledgeable at what he does is that it is his hobby. And so he's bringing every single day new things that he sees. I listen to a Cybersecurity Today podcast every single morning, right? Getting the most up-to-date threats that are happening. It's out of Canada. Look for it on Apple. I'll get another plug. Look for it on your Apple podcasts. It's 3 minutes. It's less than 5 minutes every single day, but it's active threats that are in the industry, and you can go do more research on. So again, I think having your staff that really, really cares and lives and breathes cybersecurity is going to catch up on those evolving threats and make sure that we're changing, on a dime. Palo Alto, for example, had a threat vulnerability just for this past weekend that the patch finally came out on Monday, right? And having anybody that uses a Palo Alto firewall, right, making sure that you're on top of that. So I think what it comes down to, and I don't care how many letters you have behind your name for certifications, it doesn't change the fact that you have to give effort. Right. And a lot of this takes effort to stay on top of it. So I don't care how long you're doing this, the effort doesn't change. And I think that's the best way to stay up on top of these evolving threats is unfortunately it's effort.
I got a bunch of things, but I know we're short on time. So I'm just going to jump in. Speaking of podcasts and staying abreast, we have Patrick Laverty with the company that has the Layer 8 podcast, which is OSINT and threat intelligence, and we've got an event coming up on that. I'll drop it in chat, but if your podcasts are a great way to stay abreast of what's happening. And Patrick, if those of you that don't know him on the call, Google him after. He's an OSINT rock star. So definitely take a look at it. I'll drop it in chat. Sorry. And I'll let everything else go. I know you need to wrap up, Jeff.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And yeah, Patrick is pretty fantastic, somewhat terrifying, some might say, but just based on what he does, but still an awesome guy. And I'm glad he's on our team for sure. So one other question came in, and I'm going to end it with this one, right? We have about 3 minutes left here. But this is a great question that Tim put into the chat. Sometimes it feels like control lists are getting bloated. Any controls that you feel are no longer worth the investment in terms of time and money? Likely it depends on budget, obviously, right? But anything that is clearly low yield, do you feel like adding an extra vendor is not worth third-party risk? So kind of a couple questions in there, but as these control lists get longer and longer and longer, right? And more stuff is there. What's the return on that, right? Is it low yield? Are there things, and I don't think Tim's saying ignore controls, and that's not certainly what we're saying, but what's the balance, right? I guess is probably really the question.
I get scared to ever say you shouldn't do something because I am petrified of being wrong, and you come back and that's the one that bites you in the rear, and CJ told me so. So
no wrong answers.
I'd probably no wrong answers. But like I said earlier, I think when you go through and you prioritize certain controls based on your business and your environment, and that's part of aligning your security program to your business, right? One of my other sayings is, and I'm only gonna say this one once today, Bryan, so I'm doing good, is in 2024, security enables business, right? And for your business to grow and work with those larger companies and get those larger partners, those Fortune 500 companies, right? You have to have a security program that's commensurate with that. And if your security program aligns with your business and you'll prioritize those controls for your business, right? That's the way that you want to structure, right? A security program is not cookie cutter. It is custom to your business, and aligning those controls to your business, you'll be able to prioritize which ones are most important to you and your business. So dodged it a little bit, but that would be my answer.
So from our perspective here, what we look at from security controls is we look at our program holistically, and actually it's a viewpoint of honeycombs of all of our technology solutions, and it helps us identify if we have redundant controls in place or if we have gaps in our coverage. And then we build our strategy to address those gaps and, potentially remove those controls from our environment that really aren't adding value.